Welcome back to the Successful Farming Podcast. In today's episode, host Lorrie Boyer is joined by Dr. Mandy Bish, a Missouri State Extension crop pathologist and assistant professor at the University of Missouri. Dr. Bish dives into the world of foliar diseases in corn and soybeans, including tar spot, southern rust, and frogeye leaf spot. Today's podcast is brought to you by Revitec and Veltima fungicides from BASF. Get the most out of your acres with powerful, long-lasting disease protection.
Veltima fungicide outyields the competition by an average of 7 bushels per acre. But you've never been average. The only competition that really matters is you versus you. And with the performance of Veltima fungicide from BASF, you can take your best results even further. Beat your own record. Get every bushel you deserve. And make this your best season yet with Veltima fungicide from BASF. Always read and follow label directions.
I'm Lorrie Boyer, and joining me here on the show today is Dr. Mandy Bish. She is the Missouri State Extension crop pathologist and is an assistant professor at the University of Missouri. Let's start off by learning a little bit more about you and your background, Dr. Bish.
Sure, Lorrie. I am an assistant professor here at the University of Missouri. I've been here. This is my 3rd season, I believe, here. But I am a Missouri farm girl originally. I grew up on a farm in north central Missouri before coming to the University of Missouri for my bachelor's degree. Then I went out to the East Coast and pursued my PhD at the University of Maryland. Spent some time working at the USDA in their Foreign Disease and Weed Science Research Unit. And then my husband and I came back to Missouri and have been here for about 10 years. And I've been working in extension and pest management since then until this current appointment.
Dr. Bish, I know that you specialize in corn and soybean foliar diseases, and that is what we're going to be talking about in depth here today. So to get us started, what are some common foliar diseases that we see in corn and soybeans here in the Midwest?
Yeah, so I kind of like to break the most common ones into 2 categories, the fungal diseases that we can treat with fungicides. And then we do have a couple of bacterial diseases that we cannot treat with fungicides and really can't do anything in season to manage. So the common fungal diseases that we see, probably the one that's getting the most attention is tar spot of corn. We have southern rust of corn, which is getting a bigger foothold across the north central region. It kind of continues to move north. Gray leaf spot is consistently a fungal disease, and northern corn leaf blight are probably the most consistent diseases that we worry about.
And what about on the soybean side of things?
Yeah, on the soybean side of things, so the fungal diseases really kind of does depend on what region of the U.S. you're in. Here in the north central region, we're like the southern part of the north central region, so frogeye leaf spot is going to be probably one of the biggest ones that we're watching. Cercospora leaf blight in parts of the state is another one. So those are our 2 big ones that we look out for. We always have Septoria brown spot, which is that disease that forms lesions on the lower leaves, and eventually those trifoliates turn yellow and can fall off. But we don't usually think of Septoria brown spot as being associated with yield losses. Usually always there. It can be in bad incidences, but not usually.
Dr. Bish, as we talk about these foliar diseases you mentioned, what are symptoms that we will see out in the fields?
Yeah, so with the corn, the diseases, the foliar diseases, you're looking for lesions, which are indicative that the fungus is growing and present there. And so they look a little different. These little lesions are like spots on the leaf surfaces, and they look a little different depending on what disease we're talking about. So for tar spot, which is the one that is on everybody's mind right now, those lesions look very much like tar on a leaf, okay? So you'll see these little black lesions that can't be scraped off. And that is part of the fungal structures there. And it can also, I would say at this point in the season, the thing that we mistake tar spot for the most is insect poop or insect frass. So you only see a couple lesions, and it can be very similar to insect frass on the leaf surface.
And what kind of symptoms would we see in soybean fields if there's a fungus present?
So again, you're looking for lesions or spots on the leaves that usually there's not a great pattern for that. So a lot of our audience is probably familiar with using PPO inhibitor herbicides to control pigweeds, okay? And if you have those herbicides, they can cause these little spots on the leaf surfaces that look like some of our disease symptoms. However, that's usually going to be on all the soybeans in the entire field. And it's usually going to be only on the lower canopy of the soybean based on when we spray our herbicides. When we talk about frogeye leaf spot, we're usually going to see that on the upper canopy, and you're not going to have it on every plant consistently like you would the herbicide injury, if that makes sense. And the spots look very similar to that. They usually have a border around what is an area of grayish to brownish growth in the middle of it.
Dr. Bish, what causes these fungal diseases in fields?
Yeah, so the diseases that we most think about in season, during the season, are the diseases that are caused by fungi. Okay. And the reason that we focus on those is because many of these diseases that affect leaves, we can treat with fungicides when necessary. And so some of the things that we have to ask ourselves when we're talking about a specific disease, and I'm going to use tar spot and southern rust of corn as my examples.
Okay.
So the fungus that causes tar spot can overwinter, can survive winters in the north central US. It can survive Canada winters. So it's going to be there every year in a field. That doesn't mean the weather conditions are going to be right, but we just have to know that once tar spot is in an area, there's always a risk of getting tar spot from this fungus. Southern rust is a fungus that cannot survive winters in the north central region. And so every year, infection depends on that fungus producing spores that can move up into the north central region and infect corn plants. And both of these diseases, and again, I use them as examples because they really are on the forefront of a lot of people's minds when they're making decisions on fungicide application. And so having a basic understanding of how these diseases work, how to identify these diseases can go a long ways when you're thinking about whether to make the fungicide application or not.
Dr. Bish, are there times when a grower might want to think about applying fungicides twice a year? Because as you mentioned, a foliar disease like tar spot over winters. And as I understand, fungicides only work when there is an active fungal outbreak.
Well, that's a great question. But we have to think about the weather factors too, right? Because just because it can germinate and infect our plants doesn't mean it's going to. So the weather conditions have to be right. Additionally, when we're going to make that fungicide application, we really have to think about the prices and whether we're going to see a return on investment from those applications. And so one of the things I really focus my efforts on here in Missouri is going out and say, okay, we found tar spot in the field. Okay, what leaves is it on? Is it on lower leaves? Has it reached that ear leaf? Because the ear leaf is the leaf that is very sensitive that we really want to protect. Okay, so we haven't reached the ear leaf yet. Okay, well, is it staying? Has the growth slowed? Do you see 2 lesions? If you come back next week, do you only see 2 lesions, or is it starting to spread? And so really trying to time that fungicide application as the disease is getting to the ear leaf, if the weather conditions favor it to continue growing. And that way, the goal with that is to reduce the number of applications that you have to do so that you can better ensure your odds of having a positive return on investment. If you spray too early to try to prevent tar spot, you're going to have to come back again because of exactly what you said, that the fungicide is only, the residual activity is only going to be 2 to 3 weeks. So we don't want to go too early.
If a grower has a fungal outbreak in a field one year, are the chances of them having it again the next year pretty high, Dr. Bish?
If the environment's similar. So I like to use the example of when we think about weeds, our most problematic weed is going to be there regardless of the weather. But for these diseases like tar spot, yes, if you have a field with a history of tar spot, there is a reasonable chance that if conditions are similar, you're going to have the same problem next year. The yield losses with that disease can range from 0 bushel per acre all the way up to about 60 bushel per acre. And so the 60 always gets a lot of attention, right? But we do have incidences where it's 0. So we have to, there's no easy button, but we have to remember that not every year is an outbreak year.
We've been talking primarily about corn, Dr. Bish, but what about the soybean side of things?
In soybean, we're a little more spoiled with the genetics. It's a little easier to work in soybean. And so we have resistance in our soybean, commercial soybean, that is working right now for most of our foliar diseases. So we do not often hear of foliar disease problems, at least in Missouri. And usually when I do have a case where we have high levels of frogeye leaf spot that would warrant an application, it's because the variety selected might be high yielding, but was compromised in the resistance to frogeye.
All of these things that we have talked about so far here today, Dr. Bish, lead me right into the next topic, and that is field scouting. What is your recommendations when it comes to scouting fields for disease?
Yeah, and I think it depends. Again, having a little bit of background information on what you're scouting for can help. If I am scouting for southern rust, it's going to be moving from other fields to my field. So I'm going to be looking on the field edges initially to see it. That's usually where it's going to show up first. If I'm looking for tar spot, well, I know it could have been in my field previously. So I want to do a more randomized walk through the field to ensure that I don't have it or to look closely for it. I think that going back, you've been out and you see a lesion, going back a few days later and following up in that same area to the best of your ability to see how that has spread can help a lot once you've identified a problematic area.
What about the frequency of scouting? How often should we get out there and do that? Once a week, twice a week? How often do you think?
A lot can happen in a week. I think, again, the temperatures. So right now in Missouri, we're really hot. We found tar spot, but tar spot doesn't like the cool temperatures. So I think we have a little bit longer interval to go back in and scout. Not too long, but a little bit longer. Whereas with southern rust, it's not here yet, but once it gets here, we're going to want to check routinely. And it's easy for me to say in an office, right, that you should scout every week, but I know that that's not always practical. So doing the best you can as frequently as you can should be a common practice, because I do think, especially in corn, we can see a positive return on investment if we do our best to make that application at the ideal time. And there are lots of factors. Like I said, has it moved to the ear leaf? Is it spreading so that it's going to move to the ear leaf? So
what is the best way to decide whether or not to go ahead and apply a fungicide?
So my first suggestion is make sure we need it, which goes back to the scouting, right? Like, let's make sure that we do have a problem that we see and we're not doing a reactive or a fear-driven application, okay? Second, if you do have a problem, those products that have multiple modes of action seem to have longer residual on the leaf surfaces tend to do better. So picking a product for the disease you have, and especially with something, I keep going back to tar spot just because it is on everybody's mind. And we have hot temperatures. If we spray during the hot temperatures and then it cools off again and your corn is not through the R3 to R4 growth stage, there's a chance you could see some yield losses there. So trying to push back that fungicide application to the latest you can with multiple modes of action. And the latest you can, meaning if you start to see tar spot on the ear leaf and it's spreading, we do want to get that fungicide application down before about 5% of the leaf is covered with tar spot lesions. So if you have one lesion on the ear leaf, you might have a little window, but we want to get that fungicide application down before you get to 5%.
Imagine having more days of perfect weather, a combine that's more powerful, or even more soybean bushels per acre at harvest. With Revitec fungicide, you don't have to imagine that last one, because it's proven to deliver up to 9.5 more soybean bushels per acre than the competition. With results like that, it's easy to see why Revitec fungicide is the #1 recommended fungicide by soybean farmers. Visit Revitec.com and talk to your BASF retailer today. Always read and follow label directions.
What about choosing the best product for your field?
Yeah, I think the Crop Protection Network is a website that takes data from state extension specialists across the corn growing region of the U.S., and they have fungicide efficacy charts for these diseases that we've been talking about. And so I'm a big fan of using the Crop Protection Network's fungicide efficacy chart, because we don't have a stake in the game with regards to what products being used. And we've been testing these products on multiple geographies, multiple environments to rate for the diseases. So I would turn to extension as a source for information on what product to use.
When it comes to fungicide application and management, how do tillage practices play into it, Dr. Bish?
Yeah, so one of the projects that, again, a group of pathologists studying corn pathogens has found is that these diseases, tar spot and southern rust specifically, they can move through the air. Okay, so tillage might help bury residue that has tar spot, but you're still going to be at risk from it moving from neighboring fields and other places because those spores can move through the air really effectively.
And what about timing?
Yeah, and this is another one that's easy for me to say as I sit in my office. Wait, which is a really hard word for us, is waiting. The most consistent return on investment for fungicide applications to corn has been between that tasseling silking stage up to about R3. Okay, growth stage. So if we can make that application in that window, that has consistently been the best return on investment. And I would say it also is a little dependent. It goes back to that weather. Like, do the weather conditions favor tar spot continuing to grow, or can I wait a little bit longer?
Along those same lines, Dr. Bish, what about using fungicides when irrigating?
A lot of our diseases, a lot of our foliar diseases like moisture. And so as we get towards the end of the season in Missouri, it might be different in other states. We tend to turn on that irrigation later in the season. And we have seen some differences where tar spot has really taken off under irrigated conditions with air temperatures being mild. So yeah, I think in some situations you might have to weigh that risk of, okay, if I turn on irrigation, I might get X bushels increase, but I also increase the risk of tar spot, which I know is in this field that's going to take X bushels away from me. So we did have one example, and it was just an observation. It was not research, but there was about a 40 bushel per acre yield difference in a field with tar spot, and the area under the pivot irrigation yielded about 40 bushel per acre lower than the area outside the pivot. So thinking through those numbers.
Another question I have, Dr. Bish, is what about location?
I think field location relative to where the diseases have shown up or have been confirmed in the year. So another tool that the Crop Protection Network is helping to promote are these maps that show the diseases and where they have been confirmed. And so if you were to go to the Crop Protection Network, you could go to tools and then you can see these maps of where, hey, southern rust has already made it to Arkansas this year. So maybe my southern Missouri producers need to be aware that southern rust is in that area. So if I have a field down in that area compared to a field in north central Missouri, I'm not quite as worried about southern rust yet. I would also say that some of our fields, Missouri has two main rivers, the Mississippi River and the Missouri River that go through. We tend to see more frequent disease outbreaks in those areas near the river bottoms.
Dr. Bish, earlier you talked about field history and weather. Was there anything else you wanted to add on either one of those topics?
Yeah, I think I just want to emphasize the weather part and just being aware of the weather. There are also some good disease forecasting tools out there that incorporate the weather at your GPS points. So you can take your field, plug it in, it will go and pull the weather, the previous weather, to tell you how likelihood disease is.
Dr. Bish, you had said earlier when it comes to making the decision to use fungicides that it needs to make sense and be economically viable. I want to go back to that for just a few minutes. What are some pieces of advice you have when it comes to determining whether or not there is a return on investment for going ahead and applying a fungicide?
Yeah, I think doing the math, definitely. If you haven't a year where conditions favor disease outbreak, you can see a benefit to a well-timed fungicide application. But keep in mind, when we start talking about a two-pass application, the price is right. So I think corn on average this year, $4.20 bushel per acre. The airplane to fly on the fungicide is going to cost $13 roughly per acre. And then you have a product, and let's go $20. We'll go low, $20 per acre. So with those numbers, you would need an 8 bushel per acre increase per application to ensure you get to that break-even point. And so I would lean on, if conditions favor disease, trying to come up with that one well-timed application between tasseling and the R3 growth stage to really hedge your bets or increase your odds of seeing a positive return on investment in corn.
And what about the soybean side of things when it comes to determining the return on investment for fungicide application?
Yeah, so in Missouri, we do not typically see enough soybean disease pressure to warrant a fungicide application. What I encourage a lot of my farmers to do this year, especially with input prices the way they are and everything, is to go ahead and set out a strip trial in their field. So just run strips of fungicide compared to non-treated soybean. It's a way to still get some of your soybean protected, but also see what the value is of your product on your specific field. Yeah.
What about resistance? Can that become an issue when using fungicides, Dr. Bish?
Absolutely. And we do know that from work from Carl Bradley's group down at the University of Kentucky that we do have a frogeye leaf spot that is resistant to common fungicides we use. And I think that's pretty scary, right? Like once the fungus is inside the plant, how are you going to control it with other management practices? We already struggle with weeds that are outside of the plant, controlling those in non-chemical ways. How will we control fungi inside the plant?
That being said, what are some ways to manage fields to prevent fungicide resistance?
The biggest one is making sure that you need to spray, right? Minimize the fear-driven applications. If you need to spray, then you want to use products that have multiple modes of action. So the tendency can be to use that cheapest product that may only have one mode of action, whereas if you use the same mode of action over and over again, you're going to foster resistance more quickly.
If a grower suspects they are experiencing fungicide resistance in a field, what do you suggest we do to manage that?
Yeah, so if you suspect that you have resistance and it is a problem, I mean, first, you can definitely send samples. Usually most states have a plant diagnostic clinic that can help get you to the right person to test that pathogen and confirm that it is resistant. The other thing is with soybean, we have varieties with different genetic sources of resistance, different genes that confer the resistance. So check and see if there are other varieties with regards to the disease that you're interested in.
Dr. Bish, what about some of the ways that we can prevent foliar diseases in corn and soybeans? The first thing that pops into my mind is crop rotation. What say you on that?
Yes, crop rotation is always going to be a good thing for multiple factors, including diseases. We do see in fields where we have corn on corn on corn that we do tend to have more tar spot show up in those fields. But again, because the diseases that we're talking about today, the foliar diseases, that a lot of them have spores that can move in the air, crop rotation is going to help, but it's not going to be a silver bullet for these diseases.
That said, what would be some prevention strategies that you would suggest, Dr. Bish?
Yeah, so preventing foliar diseases is very challenging. Again, when we're talking about soybean specifically, picking the proper genetics, there are some tolerances in corn. It's just not quite the same. In soybean, sometimes you have to trade off. If I'm in an area where there's a lot of frogeye leaf spot, do I want the lower disease package or maybe do I need the higher disease resistance package on the genetics? And I think, again, because these diseases move in from other areas, it's really about that scouting.
What else would you like to mention here today with regard to foliar diseases in soybeans and corn that I haven't asked about, Dr. Bish, or anything else you would like to add to or mention to our conversation here today?
So what's I've noticed in the last couple of years is that sometimes there are bacterial pathogens that can cause disease on the leaves, and we might mistake them for a fungal infection. And so I don't want a farmer who has Goss's wilt in their crop to go spray a fungicide to try to treat that Goss's wilt because you're not going to see a positive return on investment there. So that would be another reason that scouting and proper identification is important before you go and make that fungicide application. So a lot of our bacterial pathogens in general, this is a generalized statement, but they are going to get into damaged corn. So if it's got hail damage or wind damage and has an entry point for it, they tend to get in that way. There are some symptoms of being bacterial infection, like a lot of times you can see a shiny dried spot on a leaf surface that could be indicative of bacterial oozing. And so sometimes those things can be very challenging to identify yourself. I'm going to plug Crop Protection Network one more time, but there are images and descriptions of a lot of these different diseases on that website, again, that was put together by state extension specialists throughout the U.S. Additionally, most universities do have that plant diagnostic clinic that can help you pretty quickly determine whether it's a bacteria or a fungal pathogen and whether you need to be treating or not.
Dr. Bish, anything else you would like to add here today?
I don't want to get in this habit of, well, if my neighbors, we're already in this habit. I already know this, but if my neighbor's spraying, so I better go spray now too. We don't want to do that. But if there is information about these diseases, like, hey, tar spot is in my field, then yes, you should definitely go out and scout and be looking for it.
So much information on the show here today. I want to thank my guest for joining me, Dr. Mandy Bish. She is the Missouri State Extension crop pathologist and an assistant professor at the University of Missouri. I'm Lorrie Boyer.
Thank you to our guest today, Dr. Mandy Bish, for sharing your insights on managing foliar diseases in row crops. Also, thank you to today's sponsor, BASF. For more stories like this, visit agriculture.com, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. You can also follow Successful Farming on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, and be sure to check out our other podcasts, 15 Minutes with a Farmer and Successful Farming Daily, wherever you get your podcasts.